So, you don't like science as much as you say you do. No, I'm not talking about people who say the Earth is or isn't warming. No, I'm not talking about people who say that race is or isn't biological, or that birth control does or doesn't cause abortions, or that the Earth is 6,000 or 4.8 billion years old. I'm talking about you. And it may be, or it may not be okay. The fact is, we have biases. It's what we do with them that's the problem. The fact is, it's hard to love science, because science doesn't love you back. In fact, the best way to know that any given study is real is when it's published despite the researchers not liking the result. If you're a proponent of man-made global warming and you publish a study that shows that humans have very little impact on atmospheric content, that's a good sign that actually the study is true. Galileo, after all, was, quote, just another annoying Copernican in the eyes of the, quote, scientific consensus. And it's been said that science, in part, moves on thanks to the death of scientists. Science is just a bad lover. It doesn't care about your prejudices. It doesn't care about your thoughts, your wants, your desires. Data and statistics are just what they are, which means that to truly love science, you have to not really care all that much about science. But perhaps more accurately, it could be said you have to not care what science says. I discovered this when I talked myself out of being a Christian. I had chosen to embrace Christianity because I thought it was true. If God exists, then it exists within the universe, by definition, because the universe is all that exists. So how could a God exist if it doesn't exist within the universe? This means that this God, by definition, would be natural. The very term supernatural is circular. What is supernatural? It's something that is beyond nature. What is nature? It's everything that exists. What is beyond what exists? Things that don't exist are beyond what exists. So, if you're asking whether or not somebody believes in the supernatural, you're asking whether or not they believe in something that doesn't exist. I say all this to say that I never believed in God or a God by faith, in the sense that most people mean, quote, faith. I believed in God because I believed that He existed, and I believed in Christ because I believed that He existed and was the Son of God. When I stopped believing in Him, it was because I felt the evidence compelled me away from it. Now, I'm saying this to say I didn't then, and I still don't care whether or not there is a God. This isn't because it isn't important, because it is. Whether or not there's a God in the universe, and whether or not this God is pissed, is one of the most important questions you can ask, and is one of the most important questions you can answer. But I don't care what the answer is. I simply want to know. If there's a God, I want to believe in it. And I want to know what it will take to get on that God's good side. This is how we should think about science and the truth. Because I don't have a side on the issue, and because I acknowledge the importance of the question, I'm free to acknowledge the strengths of either side. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be passionate. I'm passionate, and honestly, I wish that other people were more passionate. I'm saying that your passion sets you up for failure. You don't care about discovering the truth because you're afraid that the truth will prove you wrong. You're afraid that Democrats might be right. You're afraid that Trump might be governing well. You're afraid that your carbon footprint might be damaging future generations of children. You're afraid that corporate greed might be a net bad on society. You're afraid that white racism might not be much of a problem for minorities. You're afraid that higher taxation and welfare might be helpful to the poor. You're afraid that lowering the minimum wage might be good for job growth and prosperity. You're afraid of these things, so you shut your eyes to science. And if you're in a position to do so, maybe you'll even bury the science that seeks to find answers to these questions. Maybe you'll bury the science that seeks to find answers to questions surrounding these issues. So, for example, Sam Harris is both hated and respected on both the conservative and liberal side of the aisle, but he sometimes asks insightful questions. He was interviewing Ezra Klein, and in that interview, Harris mentions that some humans have Neanderthal DNA, and some don't. And one of the races that doesn't have Neanderthal DNA is blacks. So he asks the questions, what if it turned out that only black people have Neanderthal DNA? What indeed? What if it turned out that only black people had DNA of Neanderthals? Do you really love science enough? You might say it doesn't matter because science does say that. Very true. You're standing on the passionate premise that all people are equal. But you're standing on that premise from the position that all people are equal in a way that doesn't make anyone comfortable. Everyone is equal under the law. Everyone should have their life, liberty, and property protected equally. Everyone of every race, of every social class should have their rights protected equally, and they should be given that equal footing of equal protection under the law. This is true. But we have to acknowledge that Neanderthal DNA happened to fall within races where it's socially acceptable to say that race over there has Neanderthal DNA. What if it hadn't? Do you really love science enough to accept it? Do you love science enough to believe in it when it says things you don't like? I think you don't. I think you would reject such a study. Or maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you don't like yourself more than you like science. Or maybe you like yourself more than you like science.